Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I am well. And yourself?
I am fantastic. You know, the gorgeous weather here in the Midwest, and so things are going well. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to chat with me. May I ask you to please tell us your name and share anything about yourself you feel comfortable sharing?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Charlie Nelms, Nelms, and I grew up in Arkansas in the deep South, as people would say. And I know in North Carolina, people think of North Carolina as sort of being the new South. Well, I grew up in the old South
Hmm.
and attended a historically black college. At the time, was known as Arkansas Agricultural, Mechanical, and Normal College, an
Wow.
1890 land grant institution. And I actually have a degree in aquaculture. And
Really?
my plan had been to work for the U.S. Soil Conservation Service. And then, of course, the little war in Vietnam came along. And so that sort of, led to a change in plans. But I grew up there. And my parents, of course, are deceased now, but we still have my parents' farm, and we still have our grandmother's farm as well.
Wow.
And we've sought to honor our parents by retaining their farm and our grandparents by doing the same.
Mhm.
But I've spent 40 plus years in higher education, three times as the university president, and I ended my career from full-time remunerative work with North Carolina Central University as chancellor, and I retired from there in 2012.
Wow. That's beautiful. Um, as I told you earlier, I walk through the halls of the university and I see your name everywhere, and it's wonderful to see the things that you did for Central because I think it was really remarkable the advancement that the university experienced under your leadership, and it was really, really good. I find somehow now that's challenging that I wasn't there because I just knew I was there when you were there, but apparently our time is missed. Tell us a little bit about what Arkansas was like when you were growing up. I mean, you mentioned that you have a farm, your grandmother and your parents' farm. How did you get that land? How did that happen? Because I think for most of us, we're still waiting for our 40 acres and a mule. We haven't gotten that yet. So can you talk a little bit about that?
So I'd be happy to. So I'm from a family of 11 children, and neither of my parents graduated high school, and both are from very large families. And uh, my parents started buying this 40-acre farm in 1952 in Crittenden County, Arkansas, which that's the county, and Marion would be the county seat. So that's about 25 miles west of Memphis, Tennessee, right across the river, okay, the Mississippi River.
Mhm.
And my parents borrowed um, between their meager savings and the dollars that they borrowed from my grandparents.
Mhm.
They made an $800 down payment on this land.
Mhm.
And so that's the farm I grew up on.
Mhm.
And it was really bottom land, is what it was.
Mhm.
Um, and my father ended up cutting down many of the trees and all of that. So my parents were subsistence farmers,
Mhm.
meaning that we ended up raising everything that we consumed, from
Mhm.
cows and the milk that the cows gave, to the tomatoes, to the green beans, to the cabbage, the collard greens, all of that.
Mhm.
And of course, with a family of 11 children, I mean, you better be self sufficient, otherwise, your family will starve to death.
Yeah.
So my family held on to that land.
Mhm.
From 1952, my father died in 1985.
Mhm.
And of course, the white man who used to provide dollars for my family to make a crop said that the land was not paid for. And he was just so sure he was going to get that land, Rochelle.
Mhm.
But Lord God had other plans. And so my siblings and I paid off that farmer.
Mhm.
And so that land is still in my family. But they borrowed money, saved a little bit. So 1952, $800 was a lot of money.
It was,
A
absolutely.
lot of money.
Yeah.
But and that little farm provided an avenue for
Mhm.
my sisters and brothers and I. All of us except two ended up having an opportunity for some form of post-secondary education.
Wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah,
My husband's family owns a farm somewhere in South Carolina like that as well. I remember when we first got married, we'd go down to the farm and I felt like I had went back in time because I'm out there picking potatoes and
yeah,
okra and all of these things. I was, we're going down here for vacation. They would say, "Oh no, you're coming here to work. This is not a vacation. This is how you're gonna get some food."
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
my husband's uncle grew everything that you could imagine, from watermelons to peaches to
Yeah,
pecans. I mean, everything, and just like you said, they had cows and pigs and chickens and all of that stuff. It's a wonderful narrative for Black families who can tell that story about that, because I think it provides some context for where we are today.
absolutely,
You
absolutely.
know,
In fact, my memoir was published by the Indiana University Press in
Mhm,
2019.
mhm,
And so in my memoirs, I tell these stories about growing up in Arkansas.
mhm.
In part, I wanted to honor my family, my mother, my father, my grandparents, because there are these wonderful stories that we don't hear about, these stories of self-sufficiency and encouragement and support, hope, all of those things rolled into one.
Yep.
And so I don't ever want to forget those times. Okay. I don't ever, my parents could not vote. They had to pay a poll tax. And so now I dare not denigrate the memory of my parents by not voting. I mean,
Yeah.
I just can't imagine a Black person growing up anywhere in the United States of America, but especially in the Deep South, who
Mhm.
would not vote. I don't understand it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
And I think, you talked a little bit about how the farm made it possible for you and your family to go to the next form of education. And I think that's a very important
sure.
uh, topic, because I think that, while, and what's really ironic about this, and I really want to know what your thoughts are about this, was really thinking about that. So people who grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even parts of the 80s saw the worst. Well, I shouldn't say that. People, the early ancestors, they saw the worst, but I mean, those of us in modern times saw a very ugly time, right? So, their water hoses and dogs and all that stuff turned on people,
Sure.
and for reasons that's not very clear. So, if you remember Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? So here's a Black Wall Street sustaining themselves, not dependent on anybody financially for any kind of resources. And whatever the logic was for some people to kill and burn that town down kind of displaced
Sure.
economic prosperity for Black people in a lot of ways, and may have been the thing that, or the catalyst that people said, well, it's not going to be worth it to develop your own economic success because it may be taken away from you
Sure.
for no reason, as you described with your grandparents and your parents' farm. So there's somebody always looking for it, right? Somebody who's always thinks they have a right to it, no matter how hard we've worked to create these opportunities for ourselves. So why do you think that is the case? Why is it? I mean, if you've got everything and some Black families manage to stand up their whole family and survive, why would another group want to take that away from them? What is the logic or the reasoning behind these things like Tulsa and these current Black killings? What is the logic there?
Rochelle, it's called white privilege. There's no other way to explain it. It's called white privilege,
Mhm.
where many whites believe that they have the right. In other words, we have no rights that white people are destined or should honor in any way. It's called white privilege, and there's no other way to say that. And it's played out every day as you watch what's happening with the U.S. Supreme Court replacement of Justice Ginsburg, for example. Okay, or you look at efforts to sort of repeal everything that President Obama succeeded. Okay, it's called white privilege, and there's no other way for me to say that than to say it that way. Well, white people feel that Black people have no rights that they feel obligated to honor and to respect.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's powerful.
Yeah.
And you know, the thing that I think is really unique about that is that when you think about society as a whole, so brown people, yellow people, every right they have has been built on the backs of Black people.
Right.
Every single right that they have has been built on the backs of Black people.
Sure.
While certain ethnic groups have succeeded in climbing up the American ladder, others have been pushed down, although the only reason why Asian Americans, Latino or Hispanic Americans have many of the rights that they have is because Black people wrote that out in blood, right? So we lost lives so they could have that right. And
Absolutely.
that they don't stand up or fight for us or stand with us to appreciate what we did. I was telling somebody the other day, Black men got the right to vote before white women, you know,
Yeah.
and there's something about that, you know, the way the history is painted or prepared, that we are the underdogs. We are the scourge of the world, right? We are the worst. You know, when we had new leadership in the White House, you know, you had something like shithole towns, you know, like
That's
who
right.
would say that? Who
Yeah.
would say that about a country or a city or a town in America? Who would say that? You know, or you have these things where, you know, police are allowed to kill Black men and Black women without any fear of repercussions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A Black man in Michigan, I read the other day, was somehow police came into his home and attempted to arrest him because his white neighbors did not recognize him. A
Yeah,
man in his own home
house. Yep,
with the white police coming in, okay, arresting him in his own home.
yep,
So white is right, okay? The man is in his house. The white neighbors did not recognize him. And so somehow he's the culprit.
yeah,
The
absolutely.
man could have been killed if he had just sort of made an awkward move and so on and so forth. So
Yeah,
it's called white privilege and all of that. And so what we have to do, I think, is to remain forever cognizant of the fact that no matter how much education we acquire, no matter how many properties we own, no
mhm,
matter what positions we occupy, white is always right in the minds of white privilege holders.
yeah. And that's such a powerful thing to even say. You know, one of these chats I did very early on. So I don't know if I told you this, but I started doing these chats after Mr. Floyd was killed because it was just such a traumatic thing for me. You know, and you had all these, you know, prominent people on TV talking about it, but we weren't talking about people that are in the trenches, right? People who are living this every single day, right? You know, so one of the things I talk to a lot of white people about is that conversation Black parents have with their children, right? On your way back and forth to wherever you're going. You know, if you see a police officer, 10 and 2, keep your driver's license and registration where you can easily get it so they can't assume you're making some kind of
Yeah.
false move or something like that. But it goes much further than that, right? So economically, you know, where are we? You know, so I mean, you know, we federal laws gave rights to the color line, right? And redlining, right? So they built houses, the GI Bill, all of these things were set against Black people, and yet still a few people have managed to get out of the tugboat and made it to the yacht, but still that path has been so difficult and is questioned every time you make a step. So for example, in your case, so I mean, you're the chancellor at North Carolina Central, a historically Black university in Durham, North Carolina, with a rich history, beautifully rich history of its founding, of what it did. And so when you are in your space with your white colleagues and your peers and all that stuff, are you recognized for what you've contributed to America, what you've contributed to young Black minds? And you know, I guess Central, I don't know how much it is now, but you know, when I was at Central, we were starting to see diversification at Central. You know, we were starting to see brown and white people come into the university. But I mean, are you recognized for what you have contributed to the American dialogue?
So I think that the recognition that I have is probably the fact that before going to North Carolina Central, I had been chancellor of two predominantly white universities.
Okay.
Okay. And so many white people don't even know what a historically Black college or university is.
Absolutely.
And in fact, many can't even use the term HBCUs. They say HCBUs, okay? And so I'm not trying to make light of it, but for many of my white proteges and colleagues, they don't really understand what an HBCU is. And they think that HBCUs are all Black. They think that such institutions are inferior. They think that such institutions are fixated in the past and so on and so forth. So when we get into these, when I get into these conversations with colleagues, it's an opportunity for me to really educate them.
Absolutely.
Okay? So much of the recognition that I have received came as a result of me being at Indiana University at Richmond or Indiana University East, and then University of Michigan at Flint. Because when you say the University of Michigan, or if you say Indiana University, those are places that people recognize, unfortunately, sadly. But I hasten to add, no, I'm not a graduate of Michigan. I have a graduate degree from Indiana University, but the place that gave me my start was a historically Black college in Arkansas, known as Arkansas A&M College, later to become the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. And so I don't ever want to forget that. I don't let people forget that. Yesterday was proclaimed as HBCU Day
I saw that.
in Bloomington, Indiana. So I went out and my wife and I put on our UAPB paraphernalia. And we are major supporters of North Carolina Central, of the University of Michigan Flint, and of Indiana University, because all of those institutions are responsible for the people we have become in our senior years.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your track from Arkansas to where you are now? Like, so what made you decide to go to that university? What was the experience you had there? And what were the things that gave you the ability to leap from that school to a predominantly white school and then back to a historically Black school, and then where you are now? And I want you to talk a little bit about your memoirs when we get a chance, but can you talk a little bit about that, and if that's included in your memoirs, please?
An excellent question. Thank you, and you for providing me an opportunity to talk about that. And so when I graduated from college in 1968, Black people could not readily enroll at predominantly white universities. In fact, the southern states had a rule, a piece of legislation, which required us to leave the South because we could not attend graduate school in North Carolina and Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So they literally paid our tuition for us to go north to graduate school. So when we graduated from college, my wife and I, in 1968 and 69 respectively, we had an option to either go as a part-time evening student at the University of Arkansas or to leave. So I had this mentor who said to me and to us, go north. And so Indiana University, NYU, New York University, Columbia University, University of Kansas, Cornell University, those were among the predominantly white universities that welcomed Black students. Okay, so we ended up coming to Indiana University. A lot of people don't know it, but Indiana University is known as the mother of Black college presidents.
Really?
The reason for that is that Black people from Florida, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama would come here during the summer and to Bloomington, work on their master's or doctoral degrees, go back to the South, work, and then come back and forth until they actually earned their degrees. So I came on the tail end of that whole great experiment, if you will, because Indiana University, under the auspices of President Herman B. Wells, WELLS, was one of those places that welcomed Black people. And so I came here and became one of the first resident assistants, my wife and I, in a residence hall at Indiana University in 1970. And so that's how we got to Indiana University. and we both found a very supportive group of liberal white folk, okay, who were supportive of us, and a very small cadre of Black people who were members of the faculty or staff at Indiana University. And so we received great support. And then we not only got our graduate degrees from here, but went off to New York and came back. And eventually, over a period of several decades, worked my way up to Chancellor of one of the regional campuses of Indiana University, left and went to Michigan, came back as Vice President of the university system, the position that I retired from. But it was because we had the support of some really wonderful people who looked like us and some of whom did not look like us.
That's an important thing to acknowledge. I always often tell people, you know, people talk about ending slavery. Slavery would not have been ended if white people had not joined in the fight for it. You know, a lot of the rights that we had took white people to engage. I understand that. That makes practical sense. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Can you talk a little bit about your memoirs? Can you tell us about the book and what were your thoughts about writing it, and what has happened as a result of writing it? Has it been cathartic for you? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So first of all, let me say to you, it was very painful. It was a very painful write, but it was something that I really needed and had to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because, and the reason for writing it was multiple in nature. One is I wanted to honor the memory of my parents and all of those people in the little Rosenwald school.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what a Rosenwald school is? Rosenwald. So Julius Rosenwald was the president and chief executive officer of Sears Roebuck and Company.
Yes.
Okay. And the Julius Rosenwald Fund ended up establishing over 5,000 schools in rural North Carolina, South Carolina, Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, South Carolina, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So I attended a Rosenwald school, okay? And we never attended school 9 consecutive months. We would chop cotton and pick cotton, and we would go to school after the harvesting season was over. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to honor the memory of my parents and all of those Black teachers, okay, who just sort of, you know, really said, Charlie, you can do it, you know? So I wanted to honor their memory. Secondly, I wanted to make clear that mentoring matters. So if I look over my life and my career, the single most important factor would be the mentoring that I received from the pastor at Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church on the Buck Lake Road, to the teachers I had at this all-Black McNeil High School, to the people that I had at Arkansas A&M College. Mentoring matters. So that was the second reason. And then the third thing that I wanted to say to aspiring leaders was this whole notion that you're more than the stuff that you possess.
Yeah.
You're more than your material possessions. You're more than the positions that you have. You're more than the positions that you occupy, okay? So this whole notion of projecting a spirit and an attitude of hope, okay? Because I really do believe that hope is what drives winter from the soul. So if you look at Black people historically, we've had 2 things that have really catapulted us ahead. One is our faith, and the second one is hope. Yeah. Faith and hope.
Faith and hope.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. And can we buy your book now? Where can we buy it?
So you can get my book on Amazon.
Okay.
Get my book from the Indiana University Press. Okay. And all of the proceeds, this is the thing about my book, this is really different. All proceeds from the sale of my book, I'm contributing those. I don't take a single penny. All of those dollars go to the United Negro College Fund and to the Thurgood Marshall College Fund for scholarships for first generation low wealth students. Because I know the difference that $125 or $200 or $300 scholarship or grant or award can make in a person's life.
Yeah.
So I have not accepted a penny from the royalties from my book. I give it all to the United Negro College Fund and to the Thurgood Marshall College Funds for scholarships.
Yeah. When you agree to let me post the chat, I'll put all that in there so people can go find the book and buy it from your Amazon link and all that.
Okay.
So I want to tell you something. So I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I went to North Carolina Central. I was a non-traditional student. I was in my mid-40s when I got my first college degree. So I started out going to a predominantly white. I got a scholarship to go to a predominantly white college in New York. And on my way there, I tripped over a guy who was trying to bring Negroes into computing. That's how he phrased it, you know. And so at first when he was talking, I didn't even know what computing was. So I just kind of ignored him. I kept walking and he yells to me, "I'll pay you $30,000. From a poor girl growing up in South Carolina, I thought I had won the lottery and all that. So I hadn't even had a degree or anything yet, but you know, I don't know what, this was some kind of government program or what it was, but they, you know, even when I got there, there wasn't a lot of Black people. But specifically, when I had my son, so I worked at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in the School of Medicine. I was the IT director, and we had done a lot of wonderful things over there. But I got pregnant with my son, and my health really took a turn for the worse. So I ended up leaving, and I went, after my son could walk and talk, I went to get my degree. So I got 2.5 degrees in 2.5 years at North Carolina Central.
Wow.
I went back after I graduated, I think second or third in my class. I graduated and then I went back. Instead of going back to work, I went and I got an executive master in public administration.
Wow. Okay.
And finished that in 2007. And then I returned to the workforce. When I returned to the workforce, I found that even with the credentials I had achieved, all that I had achieved at North Carolina Central, it wasn't equal to
Sure.
a counterpart who graduated from UNC Chapel Hill or Wake Forest or wherever it was. My North Carolina Central education wasn't as
Sure.
valuable. And I had one of my colleagues, mentor / tell me, you're going to need to get another degree from a predominantly white university. And then your degrees would matter at the historically Black college. But I want to tell you about my experience at North Carolina Central. And I think this is true for a lot of Black people when you go to historically Black colleges. In my predominantly white college, I was 7 numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. At North Carolina Central, every one of my professors knew me. They knew my family. They had come, had meals with us. We had gone and had meals with them. Everything about my experience in that historically Black college was so nurturing. It gave me a love of education. It gave me a desire to do more than just, you know, get a paycheck and pay my bills and die, you know. And I think that what's missing in a lot of colleges is that intimacy that students need to get them through, and especially Black and brown students, but I think this might be even true for white students. There's a part where you feel alienated. You're away from your parents. You haven't been away from your parents in a long time, you know, unless you go to grandmother's house or something like that, but you're away from your parents. You're in this strange place, and there are people who are looking at you wondering how you got here. Like, you're not smart enough to be here. You don't belong here, you know. And as a chancellor and as a person who has led schools, have you found that is true for you as well? Like, people question your leadership, question how you got where you are?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me. And I guess it was my pastor in Gary, Indiana used to say that when you're Black in America, you have to start perfect and improve.
Right. Amen.
Now listen to that now. You have to start
Perfect and improve.
Okay. And so that is something that I've always had to contend with. Okay. But I've never allowed other people to define me and who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Because my mama told me long before Jesse Jackson came along that I was okay, you know.
Yep.
You know, and I ended up believing my mama.
Mm-hmm.
My mama told me, my papa told me, growing up on the farm in Arkansas, that you can be anything you want to be.
Yeah.
And I was foolish enough to believe them. I was foolish enough to believe them. But anything, I did not know that anything meant that I could become the first Black person to be president or chancellor of a predominantly white university in Indiana, a red state.
Right.
Or that I could become the chancellor or president at the University of Michigan at Flint. Mm-hmm. Long before the water crisis.
Right.
Okay. And so I've always had to contend with that, but I chose to believe what my parents said to me and what those teachers in that little Rosenwald school said to me.
Mm-hmm.
They said to me, you're more than your ACT score.
Mm-hmm.
You're more than your GRE score.
Mm-hmm.
You're more than you're more than your Miller analogous test score.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And when I told my president of my little historically Black college, Arkansas M&N College, in 1966, that I wanted to be a college president, he looked at me and gave me a big smile and he said, boy, you can do it. Boy, you can do
Wonderful.
it. Okay. And so I don't allow anyone else to define me because I've already been defined.
Yeah. But I
And
think that's unique to you. I mean, because many of us struggle with maintaining our voices because so often we're muted. So
yeah,
often we're told our behaviors, our dress, our language, all of those are aggressive, and so that wonderful word aggressive, right? So when you have an aggressive linebacker or aggressive quarterback or aggressive coach, that's lauded. But when you're aggressive and you're Black and you're
yeah,
not playing a sport,
yeah.
that's a demerit.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. But what we have to say to our Black children and our Black grandchildren and nieces and nephews and proteges and mentees, we have to say to them, we are more than what they say you are. And choose to believe that
Yep.
as opposed to just believing something else. And but anyway, so I don't know where I think I digress in terms of your question. But the bottom line is yes, those have always been issues that I've had to contend with, and those are issues that we still have to contend with. And President Obama, despite the fact that he did Harvard University and became president of the United States of America, in the minds of so many people, he's still less than
Right.
the person who's the least inter. Well, I'll just leave it alone. Yeah, I'll leave that alone.
Yeah,
Okay.
we got you. We got that loud and clear.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I was so excited to talk to you about, because I want to talk about university life, not only from the leadership standpoint, but from the student standpoint. So when you're a leader of a university, what are the things that you consider when you're thinking admissions, financial aid, all the services you build around students? What are the key thoughts that you address in your leadership, and how do you do that so it's kind of uniform for all, so white people don't feel like they're being pushed down and Black people, so it's kind of like, you're creating a lateral foundation.
Sure. So for me, I've always thought about the university as existing for students. See, in order to have a university, you have to have two things. You have to have a committed learner, which is a student, and you have to have a committed faculty and staff member. I mean, you really don't need a lot of deans and vice presidents and all of that. And they are positions that exist in order to facilitate and ease the administrative functioning of a university. But you have to have two things. You have to have a committed learner and you have to have a committed faculty and staff in order to have a university. So I tried to always to never lose sight of why the university existed. That's number one. Number two is why I'm in the position that I'm in as a president, chancellor, whatever that role is, vice president, and that is to facilitate student learning. To facilitate student learning. Everything else within the university is it has to take a backseat to that. And that is a student learning piece. And so that's what I always try to say. And I guess my friend, the late Elias Blake, who was a president of Clark University or Clark College at the time in Atlanta, he said it this way, is that historically Black colleges, he said, provide a psychologically supportive environment for Black students.
Yes, absolutely, resoundingly, yes, absolutely.
Yes, a psychologically supportive environment for Black students. Now, if I'm in an environment where I'm made to feel inferior, where I'm made to feel I don't belong there, okay? Where I'm made to feel that unless my ACT, my SAT, my GRE is at a certain level, then I don't really belong there. But I never had to contend with that at this little historically Black college that I attended, nor do I think I want to believe that students at North Carolina Central, North Carolina A&T, Savannah State, and all of those other places had to contend with that either. I mean, how can a person like me go from having an ACT score of 4?
Wow.
I didn't say 24, I didn't say 14, I didn't say 34, to becoming a 3-time university president.
Yeah.
Because I could have easily have fallen prey to this whole notion that my SAT or ACT score defined me.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
But these faculty members said to me, Charlie, your score is sort of low, but you're going to be all right if you follow this schedule.
Right.
And that's what I did. And so all of that is to say that HBCUs provide a psychologically supportive environment for Black students, for all students, indeed, all students. And so I internalized that early in life. And so that was the driving force, the motivation for me to want to be a college president.
And I think you've done an amazing job. I'm grateful for what you've done at North Carolina Central. Central is such a vibrant place now. I mean, it's there's still a lot of infrastructure needs around,
Sure.
but it's such a vibrant place to be and to participate in the dialogue and to see people who look like you and they're not judging you by it. Like I was terrorized because I was so old and everybody else was young around me, so I'd be asking questions and they weren't classed to end exactly at whatever time. And I didn't understand what I heard, but it was such a wonderful environment to have the experience. And, I was able to, in the entire time, so from start to finish, I went into my doctoral program in 2012 and I finished completely in 2016. I graduated in 4 years, no ABD, no DBA or anything. I'm done, but if it weren't for North Carolina Central, I would have not made it to that predominantly white school.
I hear you.
And one of the things I really want you to talk about a little bit is, so what I hear from Black students that are, like President Obama, really brilliant students that are at predominantly white institutions, right? They're able to, navigate the academic landfill without, falling trapped to any of the mines in the field. But there's always this subtle sense in the back of your head that I don't belong here. Sure. That this is not the place for me because my colleagues do not see me as equal. My white colleagues are constantly questioning why I'm here. And what that does to the academic learning space is that Black student or brown student who may have a question is less likely to raise his or her hand for fear of being judged or categorized as not
belong.
Right. And so there's that piece of it. And then to further extrapolate that there are so few Black and brown faculty there that look like them. So can you talk to that piece a little bit?
Yeah. And so one of the things that I learned early in life is that, first of all, no one can define me. Mm-hmm. Second is that a lot of people confuse intellect with being smart. See, a lot of people have strong SAT, ACT, GRE scores. And a lot of people confuse intellect with having these high scores and all of that kind of stuff. But people are so much more than that because we have not come up with a measure, a true measure. The test takers and makers have not come up with a true measure of work ethic, motivation, persistence. And those are the things of which success is truly made and measured. It's not some capturing of your ACT or SAT or whatever. So what I say to people, my son and to others, don't let other people define you. I mean, just do not do it. And so, yeah, it's something that we all have to contend with, but we don't have to be defined by it. You may have to contend with it. The problem is when you become defined by it. And so that's sort of my take on it. And But it takes a lot of work, a continuous kind of, it's a process. It's not something that you just say no. And at this date, you've gone on to something else. It's always a part of what is. And so for President Obama with his credentials from Harvard, if Kamala Harris with her credentials from Howard,
Yeah.
just think about this stuff now. Just think about what's happening right now. Okay?
Yeah.
I mean, but anyway, I want to sort of stay clear of that, except to say that we are the people we've been waiting for.
Yep.
We are they.
That's
Now, I know grammatically that may be all one side, but we are the they.
yes, yes, yes. And we have an obligation and responsibility to those that are coming behind us,
Absolutely.
those that are standing beside us, those that are above us. You know,
That's
all of that, we have an obligation
That's right.
to nurture that. You know?
And we can't be the spook sitting by the door guarding the gate.
Right. Absolutely. You know, and when you say that, it reminds me of a term that they used to say in South Carolina a lot about black people, crabs in a bucket. As soon as one gets up, we snatch him back down.
Back down. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We can't do that.
Yeah.
We can't do that.
Yeah.
And we have so many ails in our society, right? So we have colorism, right? We have issues about people in their sexual orientation. And I don't understand why any of that matters. You know, what color you, whether you're light, dark, good hair, bad hair, no hair. What does that mean? It's just physical characteristics that are not going to last. I mean, I bet you when you were young, you had a big old afro and all that stuff.
Now I'm bald.
Right. So what difference does it make what your hair is or the color of your skin? You know, it's just absurd to me that we have allowed ourselves to pick up all the things that have been packed on our back and toted them. Yeah. Toted them to where we're going. You know, we toted it.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And so, for example, a lot of the things that happens around body shaming, okay? Or people who, I mean, we have so many things that we have internalized that are so irrelevant to the essence of who we are as people. And we have to unpack, unbundle, get rid of that craziness and stop having it drag us down. And until we do that with our children, with our grandchildren, with our neighbors' children, our church members, and so on and so forth, we're going to forever be confined or impacted by all of this nonsensical kind of stuff. Okay. And part of it is for us to recognize what we're doing. And until we recognize it, I'm not sure we'll ever be able to deal with it.
But you know, I think what you said was so beautiful. We are they that we've been waiting for. Right. We are the saviors, you know. So there's not going to be no more Martin Luther King, no Jesse Jackson, no Malcolm X, whoever it is. We are they, and we have to look at us as a collective, you know. So all the Charlie Nelms, all the people who are pushing away the negativity and embracing a broad thought about what it means to live in a society that has historically neglected and mistreated us.
Let me give you an example. So the whole notion of LGBTQ kind of thing, okay? Yeah. And people who sort of take the position that God doesn't like, I mean, when did God tell you?
Right.
That somehow a particular segment of society is acceptable or unacceptable.
Right.
I mean, when did God tell you that?
Right, and didn't tell the rest of us.
That's right. Okay, and didn't tell the rest of us, okay?
Right.
And so we have bought into a lot of this negative kind of stuff that has no real, I mean, it has absolutely nothing to do with the essence of who we are as a people.
Amen.
And we've always been the people that we are. And that's why we are special. That's why we are capable of overcoming so much of the stuff that would end up taking the steam out of so many people. But anyway, so it's hard to be optimistic in this era of the current political climate, or the COVID-19. It's hard for us to be optimistic. But you know what? I'm not going to let anybody rob me of my hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just refuse to let anyone else who's a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or a Southerner or a Northerner or an Eastern or Western, I'm not going to let you define me.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
I'm not going to do it.
Yep. But I think, you know, I want to go back a little bit to higher education, since that's where your area of expertise is. You know, where my university had a racial incident on the campus, and the leadership got all the students together to talk about it and to hear about it. And one of the things we heard over and over and over again is, how come there are no people who look like me? How come there's no place where I can go and feel safe? Where's my safe harbor in this predominantly white university?
Sure.
And the way you think about that in just the most basic terms, higher education, especially predominantly white, have been accepting Black and brown students since, you know, that became a law, that they couldn't, you know, separate and equal was not separate and equal, it was just another form of discrimination. But they've been talking about this for a long time, but yet still you don't see it in the racial makeup of those universities, right? So I'm a Black student at a predominantly white school, and my peers, my co-students are wondering how I got there. I don't have a safe place to go. So literally the experience of lots of Black people who go through predominantly whites is one of alienation, right? So I don't want to give any money to this institution. I don't want to support this institution because it's not supporting me. You know, they didn't see the value in me when I was coming in the door. So now that I'm out the door, you want to write me and say, send you some money. When were you doing that while I was there? When were you cultivating, you know, getting me to contribute to my alma mater, cultivating me, contributing and being a part of this community beyond graduation? And yet still you want to write me and say, send a check, you know, we're having a fundraising, where is it? And so I want, if you can, talk about that transition from, you know, you want me in the door, but you don't provide any resources for me to be in the door. And then when I leave, as soon as I walk out the door, the first thing you want to do is say, you know, don't forget your alma mater.
Yeah, I hear you. So here's my take on it. And that is that we have, so part of it is being in the community, but not of the community. So how is it that we become truly in the PWI community and of the PWI community, such that our contributions are appreciated, that they are valued, and that they are celebrated? And you can't talk that into existence. It's reflected in the composition of the faculty, in the composition of the staff, and the efforts on the part of the administration to make sure that historically disenfranchised people have access to the kinds of things that they need in order to be successful. And that does require the presence of what I call culturally literate administrators. And I don't want to assume that all Black folk are culturally literate administrators any more than all whites are. I've met so many culturally illiterate Black administrators who just think that somehow I made it and the rest of y'all didn't. Okay, so we have to have culturally literate, committed and responsive administrators in positions of leadership, such that when those students walk through the door, they are made to feel that they are part of the environment as opposed to guests, or people for whom special exceptions have been made in order to accommodate their presence. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, I think that there's a way for us to structure our investment in the form of time, energy, and resources to make sure that those resources support people who look like us. So give you an example. So my wife and I have a scholarship endowment at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, where we graduated. And it is the largest of all of our endowments. We have an endowment in North Carolina Central for scholarships. We have an endowment at Indiana University to support graduate students in educational leadership and policy, which was my major at Indiana University. And then we have a fellowship, a scholarship at the University of Michigan at Flint.
Mhm.
So the way we've structured those things, though, is to make sure that those dollars are going to first generation and historically disenfranchised people.
Mhm.
Okay. So when we get these requests from the university to invest, rather than just sort of setting it aside, I encourage people to invest, but define your investment in such a way that you make sure it's not being used at the discretion of people who are not committed to your well-being and the commitment to the interest of Black students. Am I making any sense now?
Oh, that's phenomenal. You know, I did the same thing. I mean, you and I have the same degree. I have my doctorate in educational leadership, uh,
Uh-huh.
and m- when I was financially able to, and I wouldn't say I'm wealthy or any of that stuff by no stretch of the imagination, but that's exactly what we did. We made it a point to put money at North Carolina Central that would help people who were coming in who looked like us, you know,
Absolutely.
because both my husband and I were non-traditional students. You know, my husband started a traditional route, and somewhere after he left home, he, you know, dropped out of school, but he went back and finished his doctorate at,
Sure.
you know, his degree at North Carolina Central. And I think the one thing about that you know, when you think about this, you know, wholeheartedly, you know, there are all these wonderful places that want money, right? You know,
Sure.
you turn your TV, everybody wants you to send them $19 a month. I mean, you can't turn to $19 a month. You know?
Absolutely.
And
Everything. You're right. You're right.
yeah,
Everything.
yep. And so when you have people who look like you and have experienced some of the obstacles that you've experienced, your thought is to help them, to do something for them, you know. And I think that that's beautiful what you just said, and that, you know, that's really important. And I think that that's the conversation
Mhm.
Black people who graduate from predominantly white universities have to have with
That's right.
themselves and with the university. If you want my money, I'm going to give it to you based on these conditions. I'm not going to just, you know, throw you a check every month so
Yeah,
that you can,
absolutely.
you know, grow your endowment, but I'm going to really, you know, focus on these people that really need help, you know. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And when you are the investor, and I have this whole notion that everyone can be a philanthropist, and philanthropy is not measured in the size of your gift, but the spirit with which you give, okay, and whether or not the gift is commensurate with your capacity.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
so my gift is just as important as Bill Gates's gift.
Right.
My gift is just as important as Michael Bloomberg's gift. My gift is just as important as the man who was the founder of Amazon. I can't give as much.
Jeff Bezos.
Okay, but I tell you what, as long as I give it commensurate with my capacity,
Yep.
and I have the spirit of wanting to enhance opportunities for historically disenfranchised people, that hey, I'm as much of a philanthropist as the next person.
Absolutely. That's a really powerful statement. I know we don't have very much time, but I want to get to one topic I want you to talk about if you can. So we've
Okay.
been hearing a lot in the media about institutional and systemic racism.
Uh-huh.
There is a bright line between the two of them. You know, people lump them as institutional or systematic, where they are two totally different things. So can you talk about what they are and how they manifest themselves in spaces where there are Black and brown people with the more white privileged people?
So let me just say this to you. Racism is as real as America is. Racism and systemic racism is as real, and it is reflected in who's in the White House. It's reflected in all of the craziness that's going on around the replacement for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's reflected in voter suppression. I mean, it's real.
Right.
And for anybody who can't understand that, I don't understand, but they're not thinking. Okay? And so I would say to you that systemic racism is as real as America. It's been a part of the America, the place that we call our homeland. But you know what? our families and our ancestors helped to build this place.
Yeah.
So for us to walk away and say that we're not going to force it to confront the racism that's there, and it's reflected in, you're in North Carolina and I'm in Indiana. Okay. So we get into these situations where there's a Black president, chancellor, dean, department chair, and we get into these one and done situations.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the best example of systemic racism, a
Mm-hmm.
one and done situation. Whether it's president, whether it's dean, whether it's provost, whether it is department chair, whether it's coach, whether it is academic advisor, it's a one and done kind of situation. Okay. And so it is real.
Yeah.
And we need to call it what it is. Not only must we call it what it is, we must say, here are the ways in which you must address it, white people and people in power and control, if you're serious about undoing it, as opposed to issuing these proclamations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can have a diverse university, but that's not the same as having an equitable university.
Yeah.
We can have an inclusive university, but that's not the same as having an equitable university. And what we need to do is to not get caught up in this nonsense about diversity. I value diversity. Believe me, I do. But I understand the difference between diversity and equity.
Amen.
And that's what we need. The focus must be on equity.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that I focus on, so my advocacy has always been Black and brown people in STEM.
Yes.
In my career, and I've been at this for 45, 46 years now.
Uh-huh.
And I constantly ask, why am I not a CIO, a COO, a CTO, whatever it is? Why am I not the head person in charge of all my experience? I've talked to a lot of people who are in higher education who have way less experience,
That's
less
right.
education, and have way more than I have and been given opportunities, right? And so one of the things I think is really important for us to think about, so equity is that word that really jumps out at you, right? Because, diversity, if like, there was an article in the Washington Post a few years ago that a woman wrote. She said, why do we not have diverse faculty? Because we don't want them. So it's easy to create,
That's right.
these scapegoats for there not to be diverse people, right? And diversity has to be more than just, bringing in one Black person or one brown person or one Asian person or whatever it is you're bringing in. It must be a mindset that you're really focused on making the environment better for all. And I tell people this all the time. If you walk outside your door and look in your yard, you don't have a yard full of pine trees. You've got a mango, you got oak, you got all these different trees, because the universe has given us a perfect example of what diversity is. It's given us, there is no one tree. There's no one ant. There's no one snake. There's
That's right. I understand.
multitudes of diversity in those things. And for us to think as a society that one group of people are the ideal people flies in the face of what this world is, if you think about it just systematically from the idea of nature and the types of beings, right? So, what's here. So to think that we want one group to be superior to another group just dislodges what the universe is. Because I always tell people who don't believe in diversity, just walk outside your yard, look at it, start counting the trees. You can learn by the leaves. They're different by leaves. You could tell they're, and so there's that. But I digress as well. So I want to end this, but I want you to first tell us again, say your name, tell us the name of your memoirs, and where we can find you if we want to write for some advice or guidance.
Good enough. So my name is Charlie Nelms, and my name is really Charlie, Charlie, not Charles, not Chuck, it's not Chip. My name is really Charlie, okay? And I'm good with my name, and I don't need to be called doctor or anything, even though I have a doctoral degree. But I'm just Charlie Nelms, and that's what's on my birth certificate, and I'm good with that. But the title of my memoir is From Cotton Fields to University Leadership, All Eyes on Charlie, a memoir. Now, this whole notion of all eyes on Charlie is from W.E.B. Du Bois's whole concept of double consciousness. So we are expected to see on the part of Black people and white people and other people to be all of these things. So we live in this world where we're straddled between two worlds, a Black world and a white world, and then another world, okay? And so, and we have to produce and to be stable and responsive and all of that. But from cotton fields to university leadership, All Eyes on Charlie, a memoir published by the Indiana University Press as one of 20 books as a part of the bicentennial celebration of Indiana University, the place where I earned my doctorate in education, leadership, and policy in 1977. And so I have over a 50-year affiliation with Indiana University, and they were kind enough to publish my memoir. And all of the royalties are being contributed to the United Negro College Fund and to the Thurgood Marshall College Fund for scholarships for first-generation low-wealth students.
That's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you.
I hope you'll come back, but I have like 8,000 more questions to ask you. So
Look forward to talking with you. Take care and have a wonderful.
thank you so much. And I will send you a link to this. Please look at the video. Let me
I
once
will.
you get, let me know if I can upload it.
Okay,
Thank you
thank you
again
very much.
I am
Okay.
very grateful.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Stay well.
Same to you.
Bye.